How rising to the top pushed them over the edge. HealthSouth started as AmCare Incorporated in 1984 in Birmingham, Alabama, and it was founded by Scrushy and Beam. They changed their name to HealthSouth Corporation in 1985. Their main focus was rehabilitation centers for things like sports medicine and physical therapy. They also had outpatient surgery centers. They were cheaper than the rest because they used the same architectural layouts and designs for all of their facilities. And they had more of an expensive sports club feel than a dingy hospital, so they gained popularity very quickly. Richard Scrushy was the CEO and one of the founders. He started out being a vice president for a Houston company that was called LifeMark Corporation, and they were a healthcare management firm. Him and Beam founded AmCare together in '84, and he was accused of being the mastermind behind the entire fraud. His CFOs and accountants testified that he told them to make the journal entries or he would find someone else to do them, insinuating they would be fired if they would not do what he asked them to. Aaron Beam was one of the founders, and he worked for HealthSouth until 1997 when he quit. This was just 1 year after they started committing fraud in the company. He said in an interview that he just couldn't take the guilt, but instead of coming forward at the time, he just quit. Weston Smith committed fraud for HealthSouth for 15 years. He was the whistleblower that went to the FBI and told them what was going on in 2003. In an interview, Aaron Beam was asked, how did the fraud begin? And his reply was, by 1994-95, we were a Fortune 500 company and the largest company in Alabama. We had 40,000 employees in all 50 states. But as we matured, it got more and more difficult to make our numbers. You can't keep growing at 20 to 30% every year on the bottom line. To keep the street from lowering its estimates, we started lowering our reserves for bad debts. When we did acquisitions, we would change the estimates of the companies we were acquiring so we could apply those estimates to our earnings as we went forward. We committed fraud in the summer of '96 when we could no longer change estimates to make earnings. We thought we could make a lot of entries small enough that the auditors wouldn't detect them. So one night during the second quarter of 1996, I said, okay, let's do it. And we credited revenue that did not exist, and we debited assets that did not exist. The fraud went on for a total of 17 years. And in the end, it came out to be between $3.8 and $4.6 billion. Most of the fraudulent entries were through acquisitions. Smith said in an interview, let's say we acquired net assets of $600,000 and intangibles of $400,000 was included in that. Basic boring accounting, right? But what did we do? In our acquisition account, we created every liability we could dream of and put them into the open entry under assumed debt. Then the net assets were understated primarily through the accounts receivable reserves and things like that. They would also book accounts receivables as income before payment was received. They did that one a lot. The trading was shut down for several days as soon as everything came out. They almost had to file bankruptcy, but they didn't. They had to do a total restructuring of the entire company. Scrushy was found not guilty on securities fraud, believe it or not, but later he was tried and found guilty of bribing a governor of Alabama on non-related charges. Weston Smith was found guilty of securities fraud and served 14 of his 27-month sentence, and Aaron Beam was found guilty of wire fraud and sentenced to 3 months. How did the auditors miss this? Well, the entries were really small, but in large quantities. And the CFOs and CEO Scrushy would have these family meetings to figure out how they would cook the books. They figured out how to under or overstate accounts to hide their fraudulent entries. An ex-accountant by the name of Michael Vines tried to report HealthSouth for their fraud, but at the time he was just seen as a disgruntled ex-employee. Vines testified that accountants would move expenses from the income statement to the balance sheet. This helped the company's expenses look lower than they actually were, which increased net income. Ernst & Young would not catch these expenses because the accountants were to keep them between $500 and $4,999, and Ernst & Young only examined expenses over $5,000. Internal auditors were either in on the fraud or really missed a lot of stuff. And Ernst & Young was quoted when they were asked how they missed it. They said, when individuals are determined to commit a crime, as was the case with certain executives at HealthSouth, a financial audit cannot be expected to detect that crime. So looking back now, Smith and Beam obviously say, if I could go back, I would stand up to Scrushy and say no. They are actually motivational speakers now, and they go to different college campuses and talk about ethics, and so does Scrushy, for that matter. They should have had more transparency with these family meetings that they had, although with so many accountants being in on the fraud, this may not have helped at all. Having multiple accountants signing off on revenues and making sure there was actual proof, such as real invoices, checks, paper trails, etc. No internal controls were being followed. The CFOs and CEO, they set the tone at the top of unethical accounting, and that trickled down through the entire chain of command. Even the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002 didn't stop them. The CFOs signed off on these financial statements, knowing they were full of fraudulent and unexplained entries. If auditors were doing their jobs correctly and using trend analysis and ratio analysis, they might have caught them sooner. But with how good they were at covering everything up, and with the amount of employees that were in on the fraud, it realistically could have went on for a lot longer than it actually did.